Hello and welcome back to my C10 build. Today I'm going to go over the narrowing the rear end, some tire selection, do a quick walkthrough for those of you guys that have been watching the truck. Everything's out of the inside. I've got some minor rust repair to do, but things are kind of getting to that point now where doing the rear end is the last thing. I also pulled the steering box out of it, going back to a manual. More on that later. Also, I want to talk a little bit about tire and wheel selection today, because that's kind of what motivated me to go this direction. And we'll start kind of with the tires and wheels. One thing about this truck, it was initially a step side. It was what they called a heavy half. Not sure how many years they made them. This is a 77. So it came with heavier front coils, and it came with 56-inch leaf springs on the back. And so the axle centered in the same place. The measurement was the same in the front, but it was 4 inches longer in the back. And so if you guys ever run across this, there are holes drilled up closer. So you could put a 52-inch spring in there just by moving these hangers forward. I don't think it would hurt anything. It wouldn't change the brake lines. It would just give you a little bit shorter spring in the back, which for drag racing is better. This thing also had, I think, a 7 or an 8 leaf spring pack with a really heavy, almost 1 inch thick overload on it. And so that's been kind of modified over time. You can see the angle, how steep the angle is of this perch. You get down here, see how far forward it's leaning. So with changing the springs and what I've done so far, I've lowered the back about 7 inches. The front, I used a 2.5-inch drop spindle and 2-inch lowering springs. Just a word of caution, if you're going to go with anything more than a 2-inch spindle on the front, you will have to provide some clearance on the lower control arm and the tie rod ends to give you the clearance if you want to run a 15-inch wheel. So initially, this was just an all original patina truck. The paint was pretty faded out on it. And I really didn't want to run custom wheels. I'm also, at that point I was trying to do budget. And so I ended up running a 15x8 on the back, 15x7 on the front with Cooper radials. These are 255/70 on the back, 235/70 on the front, and excuse the heater, I'll turn that off. It'll go off in a second. So this was a good combination. These tires were about 29 inches tall, which kind of helped it run down the road. They filled up the fender well, and they had a good amount of sidewall in there, so you get a nice ride out of them, as good as it can be in this kind of a rig. For my race setup, I needed a little wider wheel, and so I run a 10-inch wheel on the back with a 27/1150 tire and a 4.5-inch wheel on the front. This is a 28x45 on the front. The problem with running the race setup is I only live about 12 miles from the drag strip, and it gets 100 plus in the summertime out here. And so laying down and changing tires at the strip is a major pain in the butt. And so I usually just ran my slicks, all summer long. But these front tires are just, it looks cool with the skinnies on it, but they're just not safe. These tires are super, super thin sidewalls, and I have to run There's a canyon between here and the track, so I have to run at pretty good highway speed and through that canyon, and I've just never felt safe with running these front ones. So the other thing that happened was I'm running a 373 rear end gear in there on a with mini spool, you know, the lock blocks. And because of that gear ratio, in order to get any RPM out of the motor, I've got to run a really short tire. So these are 27 1150s. This puts me through the lights at, you know, at 110, it would put me at about 5,243 RPM, which is, you know, well below the red line of the motor. And so you're really kind of not getting good use of the gears out of it. And then they also look funny because they don't fill up the fender wells very well. So that was kind of always in the back of my head. And even though I bought these both new for the front and rear, I changed my mind and decided I really didn't want to go that direction. So I bought some really nice weld wheels. These are 14-inch wide. And I would like to run or have ordered the Mickey Thompson Sportsman Pro. These are a 33 1950. The actual diameter is 32 inches on them. Still waiting for these. They're back ordered. But that's going to put me through the lights with a 456 rear end gear at about 5,400 at 110. And up to 5,900 if I can get it to 120. So that's a more usable RPM. It will fill up the fender well completely. These tires are almost 20 inches wide installed. And so here's a little shot from the side. These are my road tires. Those are the slicks in front of it. And then you can see the wheel back here. And so that is a ton of wheel, you know, that I'm trying to get under the truck. And I apologize for all of the confusion. There's a lot of stuff in the way. I have the weights on here because I'm trying to simulate the weight of the bed and stuff when it's installed. And if I take all of this up, it's up so high in the air, I'm having a hard time figuring everything else out. And so I've kind of loaded down the back of it to, you know, get my spring dimensions and stuff. The other thing that was happening here is you can see the shock mounts here and down there. And so these shocks ended up by the time the truck was loaded, the shocks were almost in a horizontal position. And anytime you go past 45 degrees, they bind. They don't function anymore. And so on these trucks, you have one shock going forward, one shock going back. And between the two of them, it would not let the suspension work. And so it rode horrible. It was too stiff. It wouldn't flex under power. And so, you know, I ordered the stock or the shock extensions and all of that, but it really just adds more wonkiness to the whole thing. So I decided to try to fix that at the same time. In order to get these wide wheels and tires under there, this spring is going to have to go inboard. And so I'm going to move these leaf springs under the frame rails. I'll talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of stuff happening here on both the outside of the frame and inside the frame with that crossbar. And so I'm going to replace all of these brackets and reinforcements and everything with just a standard front spring hanger. This goes underneath the frame rail like so. And so this will get reinforced. There'll be a little bit more to it, but this will be under the frame rail. And then there's kind of an extra little support that goes in there when it's all done to keep it from flexing. So this will be the fix for the front. Obviously it'll mount, in the stock location, and I'll square all of that up. And then I'm going to reinforce the frame, probably a plate on the outside and maybe an additional plate on the inside, just to make sure that this is solid. So that takes care of the front. On the back, it's got the conventional shackle arrangement on there. Again, this is a lot of stuff happening outside the frame rail. And so what I'm going to do on the back is use these sliders. These go up underneath there, like so. And the spring, travels back and forth in a line. Get a better hold of this. So the springs can travel on this roller assembly straight back and forth, and it doesn't allow any side-to-side motion. So a lot of guys run these on dirt track cars. They were very common on the old Chryslers from the 60s and 70s. And I don't know if they had these on Camaros or something similar, but this takes all of the sideways motion out of the springs and just allows, a really, really clean setup on the back. So this is just clamped in here now, but you can see how this works. And so as the spring flexes, it just moves back and forth in this channel. So that's how I'm going to fix the back. And again, I'll need to put, some kind of a reinforcement back there just to give it a little additional strength. I talked earlier about having those 56-inch springs. And so these are going to get mounted in the stock location, so I can move the springs a little more forward. I don't need all of that length on there. I think it would work. It might soften the ride up, but it just puts more flex in the system. So how do we, trying to figure out the springs and stuff. I did a lot of measuring and stuff. I wanted to show you one more angle if I can see it, of that perch hanger on the opposite side. You can see how big of an angle that is when the truck was all the way up in the air. That was flat on the bottom. So that perch was underneath the spring. So I've already done the flip, and I welded new perches on. So while I'm right here, I have to take this rear end completely apart to get it narrowed. If you are trying to get this yoke off of there, just go either buy or rent an impact wrench. I tried pulling this off with extension bars and all of that. I couldn't even get it to move. I put an impact wrench on there and buzzed it right off of there. And then I just used my steering wheel puller. You can see how it's got a slot in there. And I put that across these two bolts. And I put some longer bolts down through there, so I didn't risk a chance of stripping out the holes on my yoke. And then I just used my steering wheel puller to pull it off. And so after dinking with it forever, trying to get it to sit still with the breaker bar, I had this whole thing apart in less than 10 minutes. So just a quick note on how to get that yoke off of there. This has to be all cleaned up before it goes in for, getting narrowed and stuff. And the other thing I want to make a note of is if you look at this flange here on the gear set, there are, I think, 3 or 4 types. They call them type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4. What they're talking about is this flange thickness that the ring gear bolts to. And so in different models of trucks, you have different flange thicknesses. And just something to be careful of if you're buying a replacement 12 bolt. You want to make sure that you're getting one of the heavier ones. They use the light duty ones in cars and the heavier duty ones in trucks. I don't know which type this one is, but it's getting replaced. This whole center section, again, I'm using these little locking, blocks in there to lock it together. But this will get a Detroit locker. And then I'm also replacing these saddle caps and bolts to a heavier duty unit. If you're going to modify these, it does have to be milled, and so make sure that whoever's doing your rear end work understands, you know, what needs to happen here to beef these up. But putting a thicker, heavier, you know, cap on that adds some additional strength. I also cleared off the area over here. From the factory, they don't weld the tubes to the housing, and so anytime you're having these rear ends worked on, you know, you want to weld this tube up. Right now it's only welded in a couple of spots, and so it does, you know, beef this up to you know, run a weld all the way around there. So this will get the C-clip eliminators. This will get changed over to a Ford type axle bearing, and so we don't need to take this cover off anymore to get the axles out. I'm going to 35 spline, using a big bearing end cap with double seals on it. I am fortunate, Dutchman axle is located near here, and so they're doing all of the modifications for me. And then when they're done with it, I can bring it back, put it in the truck, and set everything to the ride height and stuff so I can get my pinion angle just right, and I'll cover some information on that. This normally has about 2 inches of clearance, axle to frame here, and so I will be putting the C notch in here to give me a little more clearance on that. The last, and then the shock mounts, as you can see, are also outside the frame rail, and so that needs to be changed. And so did a little fishing around on that. This is the cross support and weld-in brackets for the top. This just gets cut and welded inside the frame rails on both ends. And then this is the lower bracket. So this will, excuse me a second. So this is the lower bracket assembly. I'll take a better picture of it off of the rig, but this will get welded in there, and this is what it looks like from the side. Let's back up a little bit. There we go. And so it's adjustable up and down, so you can adjust the shock height, and then this will put the shocks, you know, in a straight up and down position, so that they work, you know. I need to zoom out a little bit. So this will go inside the frame rail. Both the shocks will be on the back, and they'll operate in a straight up and down position. So these parts are available. I think I got all of this stuff from Speedway. I did order some things from Amazon. These sliders are kind of pricey, but they're good quality. I think they'll work fine. And then these front hangers are if you go to a 4x4 site and look at spring hangers, you can find those. So those are 1/4 inch thick. They're heavy duty. It should work fine. So everything so far, all of the bolts and you know, mounting hardware and everything has been the same. So this is all pretty straightforward. I need to pull this out today and get the springs over to the spring place and the rear end over to the other guys. There may be an easier way to do the springs, but I did it all in life size. And so one of the things that I found really handy for working around the shop is these. They're like giant sticky notes. This is from Office Depot. It's a flip chart. They're huge pieces of paper, and it worked really good for just, if you're like me and your eyesight's getting to the point where you gotta keep glasses handy. I just use these on the walls, and I use a Sharpie, and I don't have to worry about getting my glasses. So there's notes all over the garage about different things that I'm doing on the truck. But I transferred all of the actual measurements off of the truck over onto this. I did different loads to see how much the springs were flexing, kind of where I wanted to be. And that's what all the weights are about. You know, this is about 450 pounds on there now, and then I'm a little over 200, so I've tested it at 600, and then that puts the axle back to kind of where it was at when it was all put together and loaded. So that's what I transferred this off of. A couple of things, and I hope this isn't too glitchy up and down, but this front hanger, you can see the spring actually comes off of the center of the eye. This is important if you're running Caltrax, because there isn't much adjustment left on these. And so if you want to use the Caltrax, then you have to keep that spring coming off to the center of the eye. If you put it up on top, it's going to throw all of these clearances off. You won't have enough room to adjust it. So I'll keep this in the center on the front. The reason you would change this is if you're trying to get the truck lower, the higher you can mount the spring, the lower the truck is. And so by putting this on the top, you could pick up an inch there. If it's at the bottom and you go to the top, then you got a 2-inch difference. So on the back, it was initially coming off the center. So I want to get it up as high as possible. And then I'm moving it up 4 inches and to the top. And so by charting all of this stuff out, I was able to come up with, the dimensions and what I need. So this is going to be a split monoleaf. So they're 26 inches back to the locating pin. And then I'm estimating about an 8-inch overlap. So this is one single leaf on the front, another single leaf on the back, and this spring place will tell me what the overlap needs to be. So it's 1/2-inch steel, single leaf, one front, one back, and then center eye on the front, top of the eye on the back. And this should give me, 2 inches to the frame with the truck assembled. Once I C-notch it, that'll give me another 2 inches to play with where the 1-inch bump stops. So that's really all the play that I need. I'm not hauling anything in it. And it's probably not going to be super spongy with those 1/2-inch springs in there. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Lots of work to do, but I think this is just going to be so much cleaner, when I get all of these brackets out of there and get that up underneath the frame. So I haven't tried doing anything with the frame. All of the discoloration is just surface. There's no rust on the frame anywhere. So the next step will be, dropping this rear end out, getting the springs out of there, getting all the brackets off of it. Old funky brackets that have been welded on over time. Don't need the emergency brakes on a drag race truck. So all that stuff will come off. But that's where we're going next with it. And when I get the rear end back, or I'll get the brackets, probably do another video after I get the brackets tacked into place just to show what those look like. But I think this is the look that I want, big wheels, skinnies on the front, but I'm going to run the Mickey Thompson's front and rear, and that way I can just run those year round. And I'll keep these other ones just for rolling the truck around or taking it to the shop so they don't scratch up my other wheels. But that's where we're at. Thanks.